I was never one to believe in the paranormal. I always sought logical explanations, tangible proof. But that changed the night I was called to work the graveyard shift at Ravenscroft Asylum. The asylum, built in the late 19th century, was once a formidable institution, its grim Victorian facade looming over the town. It was closed in the 1950s, left to fall into decay until a recent restoration project aimed to transform it into a historical site. I was a security guard, tasked with protecting the building during the renovation. My shift started at 11 p.m. The night was cool and foggy, moonlight casting eerie shadows on the old structure. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of long, narrow corridors with rusted iron bars, silent echoes of torment lingering in the cold air. I set up my station in the main lobby, in front of the control panel for the CCTV cameras. As the night deepened, I found myself unsettled by the unceasing quiet. Every footfall, every breath seemed amplified in the deafening silence. I tried to shake off the discomfort, attributing it to being alone in such a desolate place. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something strange on one of the cameras. It was blurry, but I could make out a figure standing at the end of a corridor. I jumped up, my heart pounding. The building was supposed to be empty. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured down the corridor, but when I reached the end, there was nothing. I returned to the control room, my mind buzzing with confusion. But what I saw next froze me to the bone. On another monitor, the same figure now stood in the room I had just left. I sprinted back, my blood roaring in my ears, but again, there was nothing. Terrified, I decided to sit tight and wait out the night. Yet, as I watched the monitors, the figure kept appearing, moving closer and closer to my station with each sighting. The eerie silence was suddenly shattered by the loud, echoing bang of metal on metal. The sound seemed to be coming from the old cell blocks. Fear was replaced by a morbid curiosity. I took a deep breath and ventured toward the sound. The old cell doors were still in place, some ajar, others sealed shut. I rounded the corner and my blood ran cold. One of the cell doors was slamming shut, then opening over and over, with no one in sight. I was paralyzed by fear, my mind unable to comprehend the impossible. Suddenly, the motion stopped, the door standing eerily ajar. Then a low, guttural growl echoed from within the cell, freezing my blood. With the remnants of my courage, I flashed my light into the cell, revealing an empty, decaying room. The air turned icy cold, and a whispered voice filled the air, speaking a single word that sent chills down my spine. "Leave!" I ran, dropping my flashlight, my only thought to escape this nightmare. As I stumbled towards the exit, I heard a chorus of whispers growing louder with each step. The whispers turned into agonizing screams, filling the old asylum, driving me to the brink of madness. Finally, I burst out into the night, the cacophony fading behind me. I looked back one last time at the looming structure of Ravenscroft Asylum, its darkened windows seeming to gaze back at me. A chill swept over me, a whispered warning hanging in the air. I quit the very next day, haunted forever by the horrors that lingered in the forgotten corners of the Ravenscroft Asylum.
I've been a night shift nurse at St. Michael's Hospital for the better part of a decade. You'd think by now I'd be used to the odd sounds and occasional strange occurrences. But one night last winter, something happened that chilled me to the bone. It was an unusually cold night. The hallways, typically bustling with activity, were eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of the HVAC system. Around 2 a.m., I was called to the old wing, a largely disused section of the hospital where we stored excess medical equipment. It was my first time in that wing. The overhead lights flickered irregularly, casting a gloomy atmosphere over the old, dusty equipment. A chill ran down my spine, not entirely from the cold. I had been sent to retrieve an old ventilator for a patient whose condition had worsened. As I moved deeper into the wing, I couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. The air seemed heavy, as though charged with a silent, invisible dread. As I located the ventilator, I heard a faint sound. It was the echoing pitter-patter of footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest. This wing was supposed to be empty. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The footsteps halted, leaving only the muffled hum of the hospital to fill the silence. I hastily grabbed the ventilator and made my way back towards the door. Just as I reached the entrance, I heard it. A soft, childlike giggle echoing down the hallway. I froze, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There were no children in the hospital that night. Curiosity overpowered my fear, and I turned back, following the sound. As I walked deeper into the old wing, I found a room with the door slightly ajar. The giggling seemed to be coming from inside. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for a rusted old pediatric bed. But then, the giggling resumed, clearer now, and unmistakably from within the room. Suddenly, a gust of icy air swept through, slamming the door shut behind me. I turned around in a panic, the laughter now a cruel, echoing cackle. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath visible in the freezing air. In a desperate bid to leave, I fumbled with the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The laughter grew louder, surrounding me. The room darkened as the lone bulb flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. I felt an unseen presence closing in, and then everything went silent. The door swung open with a creak, the hallway bathed in the light from the overhead fixtures. I stumbled out, gasping for air, the laughter now a distant echo. From that night on, I refused to go to the old wing alone. No one else heard the giggling, and some suggested it was the stress playing tricks on me. But I know what I heard, what I felt. A cruel laughter that echoes in my nightmares to this day. A chilling reminder of the night I spent in the old wing of St. Michael's Hospital.
I was a volunteer doctor providing medical aid in a refugee camp on the border of a war-torn country. The camp was home to thousands who had fled the violence, their hopes and dreams crushed under the weight of a conflict they didn't choose. Life in the camp was far from easy. Resources were stretched thin, and we worked tirelessly to help as many as we could. Amidst the hardship, though, I found a sense of resilience in the people, a spirit that refused to break. One day, we received a group from a distant village that had been raised. Among them was a young girl, Amina, who clung to an old tattered doll, a haunting emptiness in her eyes. Amina barely spoke, but would often sit near my tent, watching me work. One day I found her trembling, her doll clutched tightly in her arms. I knelt beside her, asking what was wrong. She pointed towards the woods surrounding the camp and whispered, "He's there, the smoke man." Confused, I looked towards the woods but saw nothing unusual. I tried to reassure her that she was safe here, but her fear was palpable. From that night on, she refused to leave my tent when the sun set, her eyes always on the woods. Days passed and the camp descended into a routine, but one night a chilling wind swept through the camp. A sense of unease filled the air, and an inexplicable dread clawed at my heart. And then I saw it, a figure emerging from the woods. It was hazy, as if made of smoke. I blinked, thinking my eyes were deceiving me, but when I opened them, the figure was still there. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't look away. The figure stood still, then started moving towards the camp. My heart pounded in my chest, but a sudden realization struck me. It was heading towards my tent, towards Amina. I ran, every instinct screaming at me to get to Amina. As I reached the tent, I found her sitting up, her terrified eyes locked on the figure outside. She was muttering a prayer, her doll held tightly to her chest. I tried to calm her, to tell her that I was there and she wasn't alone, but the tent flaps flew open, the icy wind blowing them apart. The smoke man stood there, a hazy, terrifying figure. Amina screamed, a raw, agonizing sound that echoed through the silent camp. And then the figure vanished, disappearing as if it had never been there. The wind died down, the night returning to its eerie silence. From that night on, Amina never spoke of the smoke man again, but the fear in her eyes never fully disappeared. The incident shook me to my core, the memory of the smoke man forever etched in my mind. I was never one to believe in the supernatural, but in that refugee camp, on the edge of a war-torn country, I saw something that logic or reason could not explain. A terror born perhaps of the war, a smoke man who haunted the living, reminding us of the lingering ghosts of conflict and fear.
For over 15 years, I had been teaching history at Redwood High, an old, characterful school built in the late 1800s. Steeped in tradition, it was full of stories, some fascinating, and others that sent a chill down the spine. A popular tale among students was the story of Elizabeth, a bright young student from the 1930s, who, heartbroken over unrequited love, tragically took her own life. Legend said she still haunted the third-floor corridor, where her locker was located. I'd always dismissed these stories as youthful imaginations running wild. One stormy night, I stayed late to prepare for the upcoming exams. The school was eerily quiet, the silence only broken by the pattering rain and occasional roll of thunder. Around midnight, I decided to leave, my office filled with an uncomfortable, creeping cold. I stepped out into the third-floor corridor, flicking on the light switch. But the bulbs just flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the lockers. I tried to shake off the discomfort, blaming the ghost stories. As I walked down the corridor, I heard a soft sound. It was faint but distinct, a girl sobbing. My heart pounded as I followed the sound. It led me to a locker, old and rusted. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the situation. The locker belonged to Elizabeth, according to school lore. I bent down to inspect it. And as I did, the sobbing abruptly stopped. In the eerie silence, I heard something even stranger, the sound of a locker door creaking open. My blood ran cold as I saw the locker's door slowly swing open. Inside, I saw a neatly folded school uniform, a red scarf, and a closed diary. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past, turning the pages of the diary. It opened to a page with a heart-wrenching entry about unrequited love and despair. My hands shook as I read the last line. "If I can't be seen in life, I will be heard in death." Just as I finished reading, the light stopped flickering, bathing the corridor in steady fluorescent light. The locker door slammed shut, and a cold, eerie silence filled the corridor. I left in a hurry, the echoes of sobbing still ringing in my ears. After that night, I never dismissed the stories. Elizabeth, it seemed, was still trapped in her high school years, seeking someone to hear her story. Every so often, I still hear the sobbing when I'm alone in the school. The tragedy of Elizabeth serves as a grim reminder of my responsibility, not just to educate my students, but also to look after their emotional well-being, to ensure that no more lost souls wander the halls of Redwood High.
Thank you for watching. If you like this content and would like more, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps bring more viewers like you.